Thanks very much for that. I was going to have to talk a little bit to the slides, so I'll take the microphone out. But thank you for inviting me for this particular event. I think it's a very important part. And just listening and reflecting on the skills area that we discussed this morning, the areas that I'm going to go into are more in the pipeline of young people and the skill sets that we're going to need to develop, not just at the university level or TAFE level, but right back even to preschool, which is what we're seeing in the recent budget. I'm also taking the liberty to be talking about an area that I'm really passionate about, and we've got a lot of opportunity in the Hunter to develop in the area of space. So using the whole area of space to engage young people into what we refer to as the STEM professions is a good way of actually getting students to be involved in a whole range of other STEM and non-STEM professions. I'd just like to also acknowledge Professor Russell Boyce, who a lot of the work that I'll be talking about today, particularly in the space area, has been mentoring me and working on. Middle button, okay. Just an acknowledgement. So again, I'd also like to pay my respects to the traditional custodians of the land from which we meet today, to all elders past, present and future, any First Nations people here today. And I just want to do that big call out because I am passionate about STEM, for the fact that science and technology has been in our First Nations people for 65,000 years, and they use technology and have used technology in the past, future and present. Just a little bit about my background in aerospace. Started sort of my aerospace journey in the Hunter at RDA with the ME program. It was a defence initiative where we looked at developing a workforce for defence industries in the Hunter, which has been highly successful. Also worked with COSPAR, the Committee of Space Research, on a very large conference in Sydney. First time that conference has been in the Southern Hemisphere. I'm on the New South Wales Space Advisory Group, plus a number of other things. But what I want to talk to you today is about the opportunities that are going to come within space and how that can actually broaden out to other areas and how we can develop that skill set. So the Australian Space Agency has set out this ambitious program of trying to increase or triple the number of people directly employed in space and increase our overall GDP in the space area of $12 billion by 2030. Now, when we look at the space industry internationally, there's a lot of opportunities. So in a 2020 Morgan Stanley report, they've estimated that the space industry is going to go from a $350 million a year program to $1 trillion within 2040. So the opportunities that are available for us are immense in this area. Now, we have an Australian space strategy, but we also have a New South Wales space strategy. And they've identified the growth already of around 9% per year, which is going to grow up to that 14 billion annually for us and $1 trillion internationally. And this state is actually the home of a lot of highly innovative and competitive industries that are going to feed into this space industry. So just a little bit of a snapshot of New South Wales economy. So we are the most populous state, 8 million, and currently we make up $643 billion of that economy, which is larger than Singapore, Hong Kong and Malaysia. We're perfectly suited, particularly in space, because we're in the Southern Hemisphere, where the majority of the space agencies are in the northern, if not all. And our position in Asia Pacific gives us that really good opportunities. I'm going to talk about where the opportunities specifically in space are in New South Wales, which is different to some of the other areas nationally. But the big part of that is in the ICT industry and where we're leading. We're the largest employer in Australia. And most importantly, and linking to some of my colleagues here today from Newcastle University, we produce the most STEM graduates in Australia out of New South Wales, home of half of startups, and We have 600 plus global multinational techs here in our country, in New South Wales now, and we have the great reputation for high living standards. And just on that, recently I was at a Business Sydney event. Business Sydney attract conferences to New South Wales, and what they pointed out is that in that $500 billion industry, that the people who come here and they survey from overseas, 72% would like to stay here and work. So there's a big opportunity for that. So BE Sydney is doing a lot to encourage. There's 72 major conferences that are going to be in Sydney in the next 3 years. And I think the Hunter is sort of missing out on some opportunities there. And when we look at the Hunter, it took me a little while to actually find out the population of the Central Coast and Hunter. It's hard to find the figures, but it appears to be close to 1 million. So I might be able to get that verified. And that makes up 43 billion in our economy, which is about 28% of the whole of the state. So we also have, and one of our sponsors, Astro Aero Labs, we have innovation hubs in defence in particular and in aerospace in the new precinct. We also have very competitively cheap land in comparison to what we're seeing in Sydney and the growth areas there. And we have the big primes that are located in the Hunter, is what we know. But when we also look at some other strategic advantages, the Internet of Things, where a lot of this is going, very innovative part of the platforms that the Newcastle Council has been working in. We have a growing dynamic startup community, and I think these figures of the global top 350 universities, I think it's actually increased from when I got those figures. So we have a very vibrant industry sector in education and training. Very skilled workforce, particularly in the areas of where we're going to see growth. And our roads, our ports and our airport is really making us a great advantage. And the one thing that I'd also like to point out is that the living standards that we have here is what we should be really promoting to get people and skilled workforce into the Hunter. The idea of sand, surf and turf, and the real estate here is highly competitive when compared to Sydney. So how are we going to build that workforce? The workforce to me is these 3 areas that we have to unlock: technological skills, social and emotional skills, and higher cognitive skills. I'm going to come back to that about how we're actually doing that in a secondary and tertiary sense later. But the whole space industry is really a burgeoning and quite a great growth area that not a lot of people are knowing about. But we need to also understand that space is a domain, it's not a discipline. And some of the other areas that we've got strength in the Hunter are like that as well, such as advanced manufacturing and cyber and so forth. But the interest of space is like the bringing of these disciplines together, and I think we can do a lot of work in that because we have a lot of workforce that have skills in this area, particularly coming from the aero part of aerospace. So the future workforce, when we're looking at manufacturing, so we obviously have a big advantage in the Hunter as a manufacturer, but it is going to be a little bit limited. So we're not going to be necessarily building satellites and rockets and firing them off in New South Wales. That's going to happen elsewhere. Where the opportunity is in the downstream. So the applications, particularly in the ICTs area, in communication. So that artificial intelligence, being able to use the data for the secondary sense. And we know from some of the work that's been done recently that there's going to be a boom in space, particularly in the satellite and telecommunications area, and any industry that is linked to that, so fast internet, for instance, is going to have a boom. But our area of where we're lacking is actually in workforce development, and that's where the structurally we've got some problems. So the tech sector is sort of where a lot of the space stuff has got to go. And so when we're looking at that, if we look at the tech sector by itself, it is our 3rd largest industry. Now, that's behind mining and banking. Now, It's equivalent to the 5th largest employer, if we look at it in that way. And the other thing for us in New South Wales in particular, like 2.2% of the unicorns, so those startups that become billion-dollar companies, are in in New South Wales, which is significant when you look at the overall tech sector. So we're punching well above our weight. And we're leading in areas which is not really well known, but we are in the top 5 in areas such as quantum, artificial intelligence and cybersecurity. So these are all areas in which we can really improve and drive skilled employment. And 40% of the country's ICT businesses are based in New South Wales. So when we look at space and we think of South Australia, we actually have a lot more opportunity here because, to be quite frank, a lot of people who want to work in the space industry would rather work in Sydney than in South Australia. Sorry if there's any South Australians in the audience today. And I think the opportunity is to try to get that message out about working in the Hunter, and could be a good way forward for us. But sort of where I'm looking is particularly in the Inspire area. So this is where I work, looking at how we're going to attract that workforce in ICTs and how we're going to attract that workforce in STEM in general. I like to use space because it is an inspirer. And as they're saying in military terms, high tides lift all ships. If we can actually increase the interest in STEM and increase the number of students that are taking up STEM subjects in our schools, that's going to have a flow-on effect into employment and into our universities. If you look at the figures in the Hunter, we're underrepresented in students taking on STEM subjects. So we need to change that. The interesting thing about the Space Agency with Inspire, I was talking to the Space Agency yesterday. I'm also was involved in the development of this in New South Wales, where there's 5 pillars, and another big part of it is workforce development. The Space Agency has not invested at all in the Inspire part. So all the stuff we're hearing and I've heard today is about how we need to do the skilling at TAFE and above. The problem is we don't have enough young people coming in to fill those positions. So we need to change the conversation about where we're going to be putting that interest in. And there were some things that were mentioned about like industry being involved. Industry is pivotal to the success of what we're going to do in this space. And one of the things that I'm going to just be a bit controversial here was mentioned about talk to careers advisors. Careers advisors is one person to talk to. If you really want to connect to students, you need to talk to the teachers, not the careers advisors. The careers advisors only see them at the end of the journey, not at the beginning of the journey. And get involved in primary schools and get involved in doing things that are going to engage young people as early as possible. Also, talk to parents. That is the area. They are the ones that help make the decisions and the most influential people in what they're going to do for a career. And if all that parents know is what the traditional workforce is, then that's what they're going to advise their students. And in the same extent too, teachers don't know what they don't know. They don't know about workforce trends. So we need to educate them so that they can educate our students. So in the workforce development area, Hunter has actually been leading in a lot of respects, particularly in this idea of pipeline. So through the work we did previously at RDA Hunter, which I've continued to do through New South Wales Government and Department, is this advancing the next generation. Advancing the next generation was developed out of BAE Systems, and it's about looking at engage, inspire, develop, recruit. And it's about looking at, we start at primary school, we go to high school, we look at developing those skills at the TAFE level and in vocational education and a university. The problem is that everything is hitting here, and also in between. Also, we talk about micro-credentialing and we talk about retraining programs. That's where all the energy and all the money is going in at the moment. And all this backstream stuff has been pretty much ignored. So it's been left up to a small number of people, very underfunded, to be able to try to build that up. So through the program that I run is the STEM Industry Schools Partnerships Program. It's run all over the state. It's been adopted in a lot of areas nationally. It was developed in the Hunter initially through the ME program and expanded out to all sectors through Department of Education. Some of the key achievements I'd just like to mention about the work that we did in the Hunter that's gone from there. RDA Hunter set up the Mini-Me program, which was to develop skills in primary. That led to the development of the work that we did also with the SIS program. The SIS program that I run goes into secondary, primary, and also preschool. So it's looking at all sectors. So in the SPIRE section, SIS began. We developed out of the Hunter a curriculum called iSTEM. I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but these skill sets that we're talking about are now embedded into a curriculum that was developed in the Hunter with the support of organisations such as Newcastle University. AMP Control was one of the foundation companies, Varley, BAE Systems, and many others that helped develop this in the Hunter for our people. It is now being developed, utilised in 35% of schools in the state. That led to the development of the STEMship program in the Hunter. The STEMship program was identified by the OECD as world's best practice. So these are the things that are coming out of the Hunter. ME program, PTech, of course, has been here for a long time. In the developed stage, the work that we did through ME program and RDA Hunter led to the development of the aerospace systems engineering degree. And one of the areas that when you're looking at particularly space, and one of those key areas is in the idea of systems engineering and systems approaches. These are areas in which are going to be fundamental in the development of space and the development of other high-tech STEM areas. So the ability to actually work in the interfaces between professions is where the real work needs to be done. So I use the analogy of mechatronics. So when you're talking about space, mechatronics is the combination of mechanical and electrical engineering. To be successful in a lot of these areas, such as aerospace, we're going to be needing individuals that have those skills in maybe 5 different areas and be able to integrate them. So the skill sets area that we need is vastly different to what we're teaching in schools and in some cases in our universities as well. But the development of systems at Newcastle Uni was because the industry got involved and informed the university about what the needs are, and this is how we went to meet those. Hunter's jobs growth, I thought that was a little bit on the low side. I'd like to think that our growth in jobs is going to be more than that. If we get more people. And as I mentioned, the whole idea of why space. One is there's massive investment. So we just saw the government in the state budget put a whole heap of money in R&D for startups. I don't know if you're aware or not, but Cicada, the startup company in Sydney, actually has the Sydney Space Hub. So they look at specifically developing the space industry in New South Wales. Very much about providing startups with opportunities, but also developing that. And New South Wales government has been very strongly behind that, plus a lot of industry backers as well. So there's a lot of interest in space. And at the moment, New South Wales is getting a lot of interest and a lot of investment in space, but it's going more to Western Sydney and the CBD. It's not coming to Hunter. Hunter's been seen more as just the aero in aerospace, and I think we're missing out on big opportunities, because when you look at space, you've got to look at as it being a domain. So what feeds into that domain? Cybersecurity, advanced manufacturing. We're looking at even sort of areas in medtech. So if we're going to be looking at the Artemis program, we're going to be sending robotics to the moon. We've got contracts for those. I don't know if you're aware of this or not, but the development of the Australian Space Agency's mission control was developed by a company called Sabre Astronautics. Sabre Astronautics, the director of that, was a Newcastle University student who went on and was working with us in the ME program on space outreach programs. He was told there's no future in space. So he left that company, went to Sabre Astronautics and others, and has now got massive contracts for the Australian Space Agency and developing technologies like this. So these young people and the capacity that we have in the Hunter, we need to sort of retain that. He's now moved to South Australia because that's where he's followed the money there, but there's plenty of opportunities for us to do that. For us to be successful, though, we need young people to develop the skills that are going to underpin this. And the traditional curriculum that we have does not do that. We have a curriculum that puts young people in competition with each other to get the highest ATAR to go to university. And that's what we do. And I'd argue some of our universities, sorry John, sometimes it's about producing university professors rather than producing young people that are going to be employable in our industries. So we need to change that around. And I know Newcastle has done a lot of work in that area. And space is an area which we can do, and we have got a lot of DNA in that in the Hunter. So what I'm going to finish on here is how we're actually doing this in schools. So iSTEM, and I've got to remember this was developed in the Hunter, and it's a high school curriculum that was designed basically for a number of schools in the Hunter to feed into defence industries. It follows along with the priorities of New South Wales Government. It was recently rewritten and was recently developed into what's known as a department-approved elective. Originally, this course was scrapped by NESA, and there was a backlash over it. So New South Wales Government designed a whole new category of subject to make sure that this was available to our schools, and again, came out of the Hunter. And what it's about is developing those skill sets that relate to government priority areas in growth. So when we look at global New South Wales, what are the areas that they've identified? Defence, space, advanced manufacturing, cyber, technologies, particularly in quantum and artificial intelligence, medtech and ag tech. If you have a look at all those areas that are the growth areas that have been identified from New South Wales Government and what they've just invested in, the Hunter has leading opportunities in all those areas. And what this course does is prepare our young people for that. So it develops skill sets. So the electives in this are aerospace, advanced manufacturing, cybersecurity. The first cybersecurity course in Australia has been delivered this year through this program for secondary. Had that confirmed last week, it is a first. It will be delivered by Minister Henskin in the next month or so. But going back to the skill sets that we were talking about earlier, so when we're looking at the technological skills, so these are the deep skills we want to go in those areas such as aerospace, advanced manufacturing, cyber, medtech, ag tech and so forth. This program develops it. However, more importantly are these areas, the social and emotional skills. So professions are changing and we're moving more into this idea of domains rather than professions, so skills. So when we're looking at the type of skills that young people need now, if they're going to work in a systems approach, they need to work in teamwork. They need to have those skills. So at the moment, we tell them to work separately and that you compete against each other to get an ATAR. We need to change that around. Young people don't like working in that competitive way anymore too. They prefer to work together. It's changed. So we need to be less competitive and more working together because that's what the skill sets require. And we're looking at the idea of negotiation, emotional intelligence and leadership. Now these things are not typically taught in a curriculum. This curriculum specifically brings that out. That's what we're looking for because that's what industry are telling us is what they need. And industry co-wrote this with us. So New South Wales Government and industry helped write this based off the skills that they need. The higher cognitive skills, so the number one skill that I hear all the time, complex problem solving. Okay, closely behind creativity. The creativity piece is sometimes misinterpreted to be artistic. Creativity is much more than art. It's certainly part of it, But when we look at particularly our students that are really good at mathematics, they're often very good at music. So there's that creative component, but creative problem solving is the area that what I'm looking at. At a recent event, we were talking about cybersecurity, and it was asked, what is the number one skill required in cybersecurity? And they said, well, you won't be surprised, technical skills. Okay. The second one was creativity. If you think about the way in which hackers and what's happening at the moment, how they get into your systems, that creative process, 40% of the cybersecurity industry is technical, 60% is non-technical. So think about what the opportunities are there in that very big growth sector. But the idea of developing these skills, design thinking, systems thinking, a lot of people actually think that systems thinking has to be taught after you've completed a degree or you've got a technical skill sets. I've had this argument with a number of providers before that we need to get systems thinking approaches in early in our system. So thinking about those teamwork, negotiation skills, thinking about systems of systems approach are really, really important to be developed at the youngest possible age and then fostering them through. And of course, once you're at a higher level of skill set and you've been working and you've got that depth of knowledge, they can then be working more specifically on more technical systems approaches at a higher level. But we need to embed that early. If they're not working together now at a school level or at other levels, how are they going to do that in industry where it is a pivotal need? And you go to any industry now and you ask them about that collaboration piece. It is the most important thing for development. And I'll just finish off on the other thing too, is that 50% of our students in our STEM programs are female. And I use space as a way to engage young people because it's not gendered. And we need to encourage our young females not only about the culture of the workforce, which in some of our areas quite frankly stinks, to be picking the courses in high school and going to the university degrees that are going to allow them to come into this industry so that they'll have the skills to do it. And then we need to also work and look at those areas where they've got very good cultures to engage women and try to bring those into some of the areas that are not.